So you'd be surprised to know, not, that Rachel Reeves' 1.5 million homes plan has got greedy profit-making hands all over it. The Labour Party's pledge to build 1.5 million new homes over this parliament risks being dominated by private equity in the build-to-rent sector, Commonwealth has warned in a new report. Indeed, Chancellor Rachel Reeves has tied herself to fiscal rules to embed the neoliberal market throughout government planning. In her budget, she pledged money for the build-to-rent sector in order to crowd in private investment, rather than treating homes as necessary shelter provided publicly and mandated as affordable to all. Build-to-rent properties in the UK have increased to 20% of all new builds in recent years and 27% in London, the think tank states. Investors know that renting out essentials is a guaranteed way to make the most money. So basically, houses that are built for renting are dominated by overseas capital. Now, in this Commonwealth report, it shows that 1 in 5 homes in this country is built by the build-to-rent sector. That's basically big housing development companies bulk building just for renting. Now, that's not a bad thing in of itself. We do need renting and accommodation, of course. The problem, though, is, as I pointed out, it's largely owned by foreign firms. How much of that is actually going to be taxed? But also, those houses are mainly targeted for singles and couples, meaning those with families are actually left out. That's a huge problem. And then, of course, you've got the profit motive on top, which drives up the costs, and it's further explained in this report. The UK is in the midst of an unrelenting housing crisis beset by issues of unaffordability, inaccessibility, and lack of public investment with profound harmful consequences to the public. The dwindling of social housing stock through Right to Buy, obviously Right to Buy by Thatcher's absolutely decimated the housing system, and that is where the crisis basically came from. Market-orientated regeneration schemes and an absence of construction of new social homes is paired with the prospect of home ownership becoming increasingly out of reach for ordinary people without intergenerational wealth. So home ownership, I believe now, is around 65%, which is down. And of course, it says there about intergenerational wealth. That means if you can stay at home and you get your parents to help you with the deposit of your first house, then that's how a lot of people are doing it, because obviously it's so unaffordable. Both conditions leave us with an ever-expanding private rental sector where profit-seeking institutional investors, as this briefing has shown, are an important and rapidly growing presence. This creates a tension between these financial actors investing into our real estate and the nation's large and growing rental class. On one side of the ledger are powerful titans of finance with the expectation of generating returns on investment for their respective stakeholders, and on the other side are tenants who generate these revenues through rising rents. As you can see there, it points out how the rental class has exploded. Now, of course, once again, there's nothing wrong with renting. If you choose to rent, that's fine. But a lot of it, and I'd probably argue that most people who are renting are simply priced out of the housing market. But it's almost as if property developers make more money through renting, therefore there's an incentive to keep people in the private rental sector instead of buying. So despite the increase in private capital funding for housing, and Rachel Reeves facilitating this, obviously it hasn't fixed the housing crisis. And this is a major problem, right? Labour are spending money to prop up the system instead of direct state building and investment. Once again, it has to go through private capital. Now, this kind of policy has contributed to the housing crisis. There's no point throwing money into a housing system that doesn't work. And currently, it benefits landlords and those that sell homes just for a profit. Now, Labour have said they want to reform the planning system. I'm happy to get behind them. I think that's good. But that is a minuscule aspect of the housing crisis. There is still a lack of social housing, and specifically council housing. And this is the entire problem. Building more houses is absolutely the right thing to do, but when it's dominated by purely profit-making schemes, especially rental properties, you're driving up prices. A lot of people just think that building loads of houses will fix this, when, look, it's more than that. What we need to do, as I said, is build a shit ton of council houses. We need to build homes that are designed for people to actually live in them rather than an investment vehicle. If you ask me, we should seize all empty homes, get rid of people owning multiple houses. I think there should be a huge drive to push all rental properties being provided by just the state. We can nationalise swaths of building companies. We already have one, which is Homes England, and essentially we need to utilise the state for what it's good for, investment and building in the interests of people instead of profits. And I think the private rental sector shouldn't exist. It should be completely abolished, and all renting accommodation is provided by the state. Rents could be charged at cost price or slightly over to cover service. And the state will only need to reclaim the initial cost that it was to build the house, because right now, your mortgage is paying off the value of the house, not the actual cost to build it. And this is a completely broken system. Now, capitalists love to talk about competition in the context of private capital, but the state is actually extremely good as a competitive institution. If we allowed the state to do its job, you'd see the market respond and companies would have to compete with the state. And yes, the state will always win, which is good because homes shouldn't be a commodity. The reason why the housing crisis will continue under Labour is because they want to keep the current system where housing is still a profit-making machine. Labour will continue to prop up the neoliberal housing model. They don't want to radically change our approach to housing. And I wonder why. Well, Rachel Reeves makes money off of being a landlord. So many MPs, including Labour MPs, make money being landlords. So there's no incentives for our politicians to change the rules. Labour are wedded to the status quo and absolutely hate the public realm. And housing is pretty much the number one issue, right? If you want to stay in power, if you want to stop reform, at least they could tackle the housing crisis. And I know I'm repeating myself, but build more council houses. It's literally fundamental to get us out of this utter shit show.
Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.